Ben Mankiewicz, welcome to the Nightlight. I'm so glad to have you on.
Thanks for having me. I'm very grateful. Appreciate it.
I think a lot of us are grateful for TCM and for what TCM does, and I want to talk about that in a few different contexts. But first of all, 30 years of TCM, of a channel that I think kind of at the beginning, some folks weren't quite sure if it was going to last, if people were going to be interested in it, if cable operators wanted to take it. How do you think TCM made it this far?
Well, I mean, I think that because that question got answered by, there are people who want it and will support it, and cable operators who want it, cable operators who've, against our desires, have moved it on to even a higher tier to make people, pay more for it, which we do not want. So, no, there was a great appetite for it. I mean, and, I don't think it's surprising. I mean, it's only surprising because we've been having this conversation for 30 years and the conversation over the importance of movies from the classic era for longer than 30 years, of course. And I mean, no one would take seriously the argument that, like, well, nobody needs to read Catcher in the Rye anymore. We don't, why are we still reading John Steinbeck? Let's take those out of the library. Those are old books. Nobody cares about those books anymore. I mean, it's ridiculous. So it's equally ridiculous with movies.
How do you define a classic movie these days? I was going through the TCM section of the app Max, which TCM's kind of folded into. And I saw the movie Starship Troopers in there, which came out in the mid-90s. And I was like, damn it. How is that a classic movie now? But there's also a new video game out called Helldivers 2, which is perfectly styled to Starship Troopers. And as the game came out, people began to look up Starship Troopers because they wanted to know the reference. And I wonder if that's one of the distinguishing characteristics of a classic movie, that it becomes a reference, a touchstone. There's like another generation that goes, oh, I think I need to know this exists.
Well, you've given one of the many very acceptable answers for what is a classic film. I mean, does it because it takes on over some period of time, an undefined period of time, it takes on some form of cultural relevance, right? I'm not copping out on this answer at all. There is no right answer for what is a classic movie. And that suits us very well because it allows us to program largely anything we want, right? I mean, the first slogan 30 years ago for this channel, before it even went on the air, was the best movies of all time, all the time. There was no era ascribed to that. It was the best movies of all time, all the time. Over time, because of our ability to get movies and what was in our library, what was in the library that Ted Turner had acquired, and then what we added, was really to make it easiest to digest to an audience, to the audience listening to our conversation. Joshua, was that our wheelhouse was the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. We could get those movies. I mean, we would love to have shown The Godfather often on TCM, but it cost a lot of money. So would Jaws. And so, of course, would the modern superhero movies of today, right? We don't have there's no mission statement that says that we can't show those movies, right? It's just that they're very expensive, right? There's a much more robust marketplace for those movies. We became the guardians of these movies. Plenty from the 60s, plenty from the 70s, certainly silent films from the early part of the 1920s and the teens. But the 30s, 40s, and 50s probably made up, I'm making this number up, but 85% of the movies that we showed, somewhere between 85 to 90, 80 to 90 anyway. As time has gone on, we've certainly added more movies from the 70s, 60s as well. We get a lot from the 60s, certainly. And, when we can, movies from the 80s, 90s, and into the 21st century. There is no rule about what makes a classic. Sometimes, I mean, I think everyone at TCM would acknowledge that there are some movies that come out and you're like, well, that's an instant classic, right? I mean, I'll take the two most obvious movies from 2023, Barbie and Oppenheimer. Yeah. Those are classics right away. There's no, if we can show Barbie and Oppenheimer next year, we will. But we're not going to be able to.
Right.
So we don't have that much money, right?
Well, I think one of the things that also, you talked about cultural relevance. One of the things that I think makes a movie a classic is just frankly that there's an appreciation of people that you noticed it. I feel like one of the
Sure.
things
Right.
that sort of goes with a classic in terms of that cultural relevance is a feeling of being seen, of being validated for your love of something that touched you personally, and someone else is able to acknowledge it, see it, put it in a context and say, you're right, this actually did matter. It didn't just matter to you, it matters in a bigger sense. And that kind of enlarges and ennobles you as a fan. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. We, in addition, that's, but in that very question, you see the difficulty in answering what makes a classic, right? There is no year marker. There's no formal delineation, nor are we interested in a formal delineation, right? What has happened wonderfully with the channel, with Turner Classic Movies over the last 30 years is we became, I don't want to overstate it, but as we became culturally relevant ourselves, in part, not because we're so great. I think we are, but because we're the ones who have taken on this job, right? There were some other channels that did it in the beginning. AMC was doing it when we went into business, but they checked out of that business. They still make some great television there, but they don't show classic movies, and they certainly don't show them uncut and commercial free. So we became the guardians of classic Hollywood. And then what happened was this wonderful thing about, we try to answer that question, what's a classic, that we became part of the answer. Like, well, they showed it on TCM, so therefore it's a classic.
Must be a classic,
nice,
right?
Right. It's a nice place to be the arbiter of that. But there are, of course, plenty of classic films that not plenty. We have a really big library, and we don't just show movies in our library. To get to that cost issue, we have a huge budget. Our biggest expenditure by far is not on people or studios. It's on acquiring movies that we can then show on the air. What's called licensing. We get them for a certain period of time, maybe to show once, maybe we'll get to show it 3 times or 4 times in a year, or 4 times in 2 years. I don't make those deals, of course. But so we have access to a tremendous number of movies. And then by their very nature, I think their status is juiced, when they appear on TCM, which is really, really nice.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about TCM is because one of the big themes of the Nightlight is democracy, connection, the things that kind of bring us together and the things that pull us apart. And I feel like there's something to the nature of classic movies as a cultural touchstone that helps us to sort of mark who we are as a country and as a people today compared to the past. I mean, one of the bits of backstory to TCM that I found interesting was the T in TCM, Ted Turner, who made a lot of people very, very angry with the way that he dealt with classic movies. I mean, one of the clips that I found just kind of in digging back was back from 1986, well before the channel went on the air, where he defended his purchase of the MGM Film Library. Among other things, he said, the last time I checked, I owned the films that were in the process of colorizing. I can do whatever I want with them. And if they're going to be shown on television, they're going to be in color. He bought them, of course, not just purely for preservation's sake, but because he wanted to put them on television. And one of the things that kind of was remarkable to me is how right he was to acquire them, but how wrong he apparently was to try to colorize black and white movies. Among other things, in this LA Times write-up, he said, I'm colorizing Casablanca just for controversy's sake. Once people start watching the colored version, they won't bother with the original. I feel, Ben, like that was just amazingly Ted Turner-esque of him, just kind of the brashness and the fact that he was right to acquire them, but wrong to try to colorize them, and people really punched back, kind of speaks to what some of these movies mean in a deeper way to sort of understanding who we are, I guess, or who we were at that point.
So life is complicated, right? And Ted Turner's no longer affiliated with the channel. I mean, his name's there and it'll be there forever. So I don't owe him anything. I don't work for him. He's a genius, and we owe this channel to him. And his vision for this business is unparalleled, right? I mean, he really saw what this business could be. And the reason he acquired these movies is because he loved watching them. And he here's where our maybe one similarity. He didn't think he was exceptional. I don't think I'm exceptional, which is it's a good arbiter of when I try to figure out what I should say on the air. I'm like, well, if I think this is interesting, other people probably will, because I'm fairly ordinary, right, in many ways. And he thought these movies are worth something, and they're inexpensive, and nobody's paying for them. But people will watch this, and they don't cost us anything. Once we get them, then we can just show them. So he's the one who saw a real value in this. He's the leader who saw real value in this. There certainly were others, but he was the guy at the top of the food chain who recognized that this was valuable. And if you ask him today what his two proudest accomplishments in what has been a remarkable life, what his two proudest business accomplishments were, would be starting CNN and starting TCM. So I don't even need to equivocate on that. That guy's amazing. I wish I knew him better. Colorizing movies in his mind was all about getting a generation that balked at black and white to see these great movies. So he may have been wrong, but his intent was entirely pure, 100%. So if he was wrong, it was just a misreading of who that marketplace was. I mean, and what that marketplace wanted, and that he didn't do that very often. And to his eternal credit, he did it for a while, and then he was like, "All right, okay, you win. My bad, right?
We'll fix it."
And we'll keep showing it. I mean, we're going to tell a great story coming up this month on the air about the Brad Siegel, who was the first guy who ran TCM for him. And he and Ted made a deal because Brad was resistant to colorization, right? And he was like, "No, look, man, if you're going to start a movie channel that shows all the best movies all the time, right? The greatest movies of all time, all the time," going back to that slogan, Brad said to him, "and if you're going to, and our whole thing is going to be, we're going to show them uncut and commercial free. We cannot turn a black and white film into color. We cannot put that on the air if that's going to be our mantra." And so Ted was like, "Okay." And Brad also at that point ran TNT, which was the first channel of his to show these movies with commercials, because that's TNT's business model. They have to have commercials. And so Ted was like, "All right, fine. You guys get the black and white ones, and we'll keep showing the color ones on TNT." And Brad was like, "Great, have at it. Good deal." And then over time, it turned out that people did not want to see Casablanca in color. I don't either. I don't want the movies changed.
I can't even imagine watching Casablanca in color. That would feel.
Well, I've seen it. I don't remember. I don't remember if I saw the whole thing. I definitely saw it in color as that was happening. Maybe I just saw part of it. I don't know. My memory's so bad now. But so, the technology. We saw. Peter Jackson's amazing picture about that turned all that Civil War footage when they were young. I'm butchering the title. While they were still young, but it was World War I, and they managed to read lips and create the audio around this black and white film, and they colorized it. And there's been a lot of colorization of World War II footage, and it's kind of amazing, because it makes it more vibrant. It brings it more to life. There was color then, right? Those planes attacked Pearl Harbor on a bright sunny day, right? It looks different in color. Is that, excuse me, I literally cannot figure out my cell phone anymore. I'm incapable of figuring out.
It's amazing.
When it's on,
It's amazing. I can stream with you from the second bedroom in my apartment with this technology, but still, I will leave my cell phone on in the middle of the show, and people will be like, you Mr. High Tech. So I can totally.
Why do they use the word haptics as if that's a word that any living human being has ever used in a conversation or understands?
You know why? Because it adds $125 to the retail price. That's why they use, because if you just said it vibrates, it doesn't, you can't make money off of something that is that simply you can feel it. It doesn't work that way. You got to make it, you know what? Just colorization. Why can't you just keep it simple? Show it the way that it was. Well, because you can make money off of it. And to the point you were making, as I was prepping to talk to you about this, I did not realize that after the hue and cry over Ted Turner adding hues to movies, there was a congressional hearing, like the Senate Judiciary Committee got involved in talking about film preservation. Sidney Pollack testified, Woody Allen testified, and I want to play a clip of Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire's famous dancing partner, testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee. She was talking about the colorization of 42nd Street, which came out in the early 30s. Busby Berkeley directed the dance sequences. She was in it. And she talks about her disgust at seeing the way the technology of the day colorized the movie. Here is part of what Ginger Rogers testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Can you accurately color a Busby Berkeley chorus line of 100 beautiful girls with their arms, legs, and costumes twirling? The answer is you can't, and you shouldn't try. And all these lovely girls in 42nd Street suddenly had the same orange face, the same orange legs, the same green costume, and the same blank look. Actors have already suffered many indignities through the unbridled exploitation of our popular films. Our names, our voices, our faces are considered grist for the mills of commerce. But a motion picture is more than just a strip of celluloid. It is the blood, sweat, and tears of hundreds of artists. It is our energy and imagination, and captured by the camera. When it is chopped or colored or clipped, well, so am I. This computerized cartoon coloring is the final indignity. It is the destruction of all I have worked to achieve. We must fight it with all of our might. We must not let computers casually redesign our cultural heritage.
Ben, I wonder if maybe in what she said, there's something of what these movies mean to us culturally, that when you change them, you kind of change us. You change the story of who we are, and we can't have that.
Yeah, it was very well written by Ginger. Whether she wrote it or not, she knew what she was saying, and she was obviously very smart. I'll correct you on one thing, just because if you were speaking to one of the other TCM hosts, Alicia Malone, she would definitely refer to Fred Astaire as Ginger Rogers' dance partner.
I beg your pardon. See what I did?
But,
See what I did? It's so easy, but I apologize to all who may have possibly been offended, but thank you for that.
I'm messing with you. You're 100%
That's okay.
right, of course. But backwards and in heels, right? She had to do everything he did, but backwards and in heels. So, but she was really. It goes to what the point I was making earlier. And by the way, that Peter Jackson movie was a Psycho when they were young. It was much better titled. They Shall Not Grow Old, and it was really quite something. And I'm sure the technology is even better since then. So part of what is in that Ginger Rogers speech there in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Was it the Judiciary Committee? Like, what was their role in this?
It was the Senate Judiciary Committee. This was, Patrick Leahy was on it. He has been at the Senate since they built that thing. And they were doing a hearing about this because after Ted Turner bought the library, there was this uproar from Hollywood, and they called all these folks from Hollywood to testify. And that actually led to the bill that created the National Film Registry, eventually a few years later.
I just imagine it'd be the Commerce Committee or something. It's just weird that it's a
judiciary. Yeah.
But anyway, I grew up in DC. I'm a political junkie. But anyway, so the part of what Ginger Rogers was complaining about was not just the sort of stealing from history, right? The theft of their own history, and in general our shared history, but for her own history, right? Was that it was bad, and that they all had the same orange hue. Well, look, I pray that this doesn't turn into a clip where the TCM host comes on and says we should revisit colorizing films. I don't think we should, but guess what? It would be better now. It would be good. It would be probably great, and it would probably represent those colors accurately. And I've seen Casablanca. I'm going to try not to exaggerate. 35 times, probably start to finish. Right. I'd watch it once in color if it were good. I would. No question. I'd be like, oh, that's really cool. Look how different Bogey looks in color. Look how different Paul Henry looks. Look at Claude Rains' face in color. Certainly look at Ingrid Bergman in color. So I don't know, man. I think we're first of all, technology is here, and that what we can do with it when it's good, it's amazing. When it's bad, it's frightening. but Ted Turner was too early, and I think based on, as you listen to Ginger Rogers there in 1987, you get a sense of what would have happened if we'd waited 15 years for this, 20 years for this, 30 years for it, right? And the product had not been so easy to dismiss as gauche and gaudy and clearly not representative of how it looked then. Anyway, it's not going to happen, and TCM is certainly going to lead the fight to keep it from happening. And I don't think there's a movement to do it now. Like, there's nobody out there desperate to show these movies in color. Part of learning about these movies and appreciating their history is seeing them as they were at the time. And the black and white photography, in many of the films is extraordinary. I mean, what they could do with the limitations of black and white was really invent a way to take pictures to show things and to showcase these films for audiences. And that, to me, more than the actors or actresses, is taken away from the work of these brilliant cinematographers working hand in hand with directors to create these beautiful black and white images.
Do you get the sense that, and this kind of goes back to my theory about classic movies and kind of the way we connect culturally, what is your sense of how much, if at all, the general public gets the value of that kind of preservation? You and I know you used to be an anchor in Miami back, and I'm from South Florida, and you know South Beach as well as I know it, where there's like the historic preservation that makes the beach the tourist attraction that it is, still had to fight with the developers who want to tear everything down and build it again every 18 months. So there's this weird kind of push and pull between, oh, that's old and classic, isn't that cute? And no, that's my personal history. Yeah, but it's old and we can build something new. No, but I need you to know who I am through that old thing. Like that tug, I always noticed living in Miami, and noticed today with the proliferation of social media and everything else. And because you kind of work in a uniquely preservationist space, I wonder what your sense is of whether or not people get the need to carry the old into the new for context, or whether people are sort of like, oh, but we can have a new thing. It's cute that the old thing existed, but I would rather play with the new thing.
So somebody just told me about that the Japanese are particularly great at this, of honoring old, but turning it into something new that still honors the old. And I don't know that much about it, but I was very struck by the conversation that happened just at the tail end of last week, that they'll take I'm sure I'm wrong here, but they'll take an old hotel was the example that was given that needed to be updated, but was a fixture in whatever town that it was in, whatever city it was in. And so they turned it into a new hotel. They'll honor the past, and they will sort of have elements in the new design that respects the past, but they move forward and they don't wring their hands about it the way we do. And I sort of respect that, as long as assuming that theory about preserving the old in the new exists. Part of the problem is our, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, our somewhat carelessness with terms. I don't know what people will respect. I just need enough people to respect the old movies, right? I mean, we're not going to win over everybody, and we don't. It was pointless to try. I mean, the knock on Bill Clinton early in his, well, maybe throughout his, among the knocks on Bill Clinton, but I mean, one of them politically was that this guy didn't know. He promised he didn't like people not to like him. He wanted to win 100% of the vote, right? But you need to win 51 person in general. In America, of course, turns out you need to win about 53% because you got to win the right states, because we have
that's a whole other conversation.
Crazy system. It's so dumb.
But we won't get into that. That's another hour-long conversation for another day.
God, hours and hours. Right?
Yeah.
So, we just need to have enough people who care about it, because what we have learned is that one of the great things about TCM, and I use this line a lot, but man, I like it. When you say, "Hey man, what are you watching on TV?" No one in the history of the world has ever said, "Oh man, I watch Showtime. I love Showtime. Anything on Showtime," right? That's a crazy thing to say. I watch. Oh, you know what I love? ABC. right? That's nonsense. No, you might like a show on Showtime or ABC, right? One of my best friends is on Billions. I like Billions. I've liked a lot of shows on Showtime, but I don't like Showtime. That's just where stuff is, right? Um, the TCM is an identifier for people. It is a badge of honor. It is it's like being a Green Bay Packers fan, right? It's like, it's like being a Yankee fan. It's like a Cubs fan almost more than anything, right? Where you're like, no, man, I'm a Cubs fan, and I take all the heartache that goes with it.
It's like being an NPR listener. You kind of use it's something you put on your shield to identify your tribe,
100%,
who you're 100%.
With. And I think our identification is even more than NPR. And I don't get me wrong, I love NPR, but that's a good one. You're right. That's exactly right. But TCM fans will, on their social media pages, identify themselves as, wife, mom, lawyer, TCM fan, right? You'll see that sort of thing. That doesn't happen with any other channel on television, save maybe for news channels sometimes, but I probably have a lot in common with those people. So these movies, to get to what keeps us together in these incredibly polarizing times where it's tempted to think that people who live two doors down for you or two towns over, or just people you see in the news, but they're Americans. And we think, man, what are they reading? What are they saying? I have nothing in common with them. I do not, their point of view is madness, and I want nothing to do with it. There are the things we always fall back on. I got news for you. Those people love their dogs and love their children and want their kids to have a better life than they do, and they want to have opportunity, and they want to feel safe. Those are all things that I want also, right? So these movies, and I've certainly learned this because I don't even really know what the breakdown politically of our audience is. I have no idea. I always imagine it's pretty close to 50-50, right? But it is nice to recognize that no matter where you come from or what you believe or who you voted for in 2020 and who you're planning to vote for coming up, that you both love Random Harvest, right? You both love Casablanca. Right. And you both think, no, I don't want to. Ted Turner may have had a nice idea, and he is the reason this channel exists. But don't colorize these movies. That's great, right? So that's comforting to work at a place that, one, matters to people, and two, no question, brings people together. I mean, the number of people. I'll wrap this up in a second. I'm sorry, running off. Okay. But the number of people who have come to me, and I can't count any longer, who've said, I couldn't stand another moment of watching the news. I didn't even want to read the paper. I just wanted to feel okay. So I watched these movies, which in their head, it works. Same thing for me, right or wrong. Well, mostly wrong. They think that it represents a time when there weren't these problems. That's wrong. Those problems were very much in existence, and there were whole problems that were much worse in many ways than the problems we have now. But nostalgia represents a good feeling you had when you were younger, or a connection to the past of people you care about and love, whether it's your folks, right, or your grandparents. That feeling, that matters, and that is universal.
You dig in on that. When you said, I just want to feel okay, dig in on that a little bit in terms of the nature of the nostalgia, which is one of the things I wanted to ask you about. But also, I think that TCM, I also saw Disney Plus did this with some of their older films and cartoons. TCM in particular did a really good job with Gone with the Wind. I think Gone with the Wind is one of my favorite movies. I think as a film, it's amazing. Obviously, it's problematic, but I think you kind of don't see another, like there's a few movies on that scale of that, like How the West Was Won giganto film that there are very few of. But I think the way that TCM did it, particularly on the app with the movie, the intro, the long panel discussion that digs into all of the issues, but allowing it to exist in that form and giving people a way to look at it without flinching, I thought was super useful and very powerful. And I wish more of us knew how to do that with more issues in this country, because I think it'd be easier for us to deal with one another. You know what I'm saying? Like, instead of creating some weird hagiography of what existed, or instead of just canceling it and pretending it never existed, there's a third way that I think classic film has taught us how to do pretty well. And I wish more of us could apply those lessons to different aspects of life. Is there something about that approach that you think is replicable that might help the rest of us kind of deal with all these other fault lines that we're trying to walk around?
Well, first, let me say how enormously comforting it is to hear you say that. That means a lot, because we spent a lot of time wringing our hands about specifically Gone with the Wind, and then this reframed series about that's what we thought of it as, reframing these movies. Because we had, we knew line item one was, we can't stop showing Gone with the Wind. It's too important historically, regardless of what you think of it as a film. It changed the industry completely. Selznick showed other filmmakers, other producers, other directors, he obviously produced the film, that, man, what you thought you could do with this art form, you have no idea, right? And so it just matters historically, right? And then in the first 10 seconds of the film, basically, and I'm barely paraphrasing, they're like, slavery was awesome. Right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Remember how great it was? Everybody was happy. It was terrific. Right? So I have, look, I know the historical importance of Gone with the Wind. And after that one, after one of those panel conversations, by the way, I think it's the one that we include in that, was like, there's an appreciation for the powerful sexual politics of Scarlett O'Hara, right? This woman in an era, both when the film was made and certainly when the film was set, of disempowering women, and that this headstrong woman took charge of her own destiny, right? And that's a whole other way of looking at the movie, which I had never really looked at particularly before. That was eye-opening to me and made me see the film in a different light, because I don't like it. I think it's very long. Well, it's undeniably very long, and I can't get past it. I mean, the first time I saw The Crawl, I don't even remember what era it was. I certainly wasn't working at TCM, and I thought, well, this is ridiculous, right? What is this? Do people, wait, you're telling me this is the greatest movie ever made, right? So, but that's part of this wonderful conversation, and the number, and every year at the festival, I meet more and more people like you who are like, love the film and are super appreciative that we did this. The danger in it is one, we want to make sure that the movie still gets shown. We also want to be able at times to introduce it without going into all this, right? Some things you're always going to have to say. I'm not going to do an intro to Gone with the Wind without mentioning slavery, or at least directing them to Jacqueline Stewart's really brilliant introduction of the film. Jacqueline Stewart, who's one of the TCM hosts, and she did that intro, and she's, she basically controls Hollywood now. She's the director of the Academy, director and president of the Academy Museum, and she's a TCM host. And she's by far the smartest host. It's not really close. It's not fair. She's a professor. And so she did a great job. So we also, though, on a lesser level than canceling the movie, which we don't want to do, is we also don't want to make people feel bad if they like it, right? Like, you're allowed to like Gone with the Wind. It's okay, right? Because the movie makes you feel certain things. And to get to the heart of your question, it is okay to like this movie. And I hope people instantly don't think, oh, here are these people telling me how I'm supposed to think. No, we're not telling you how we think. We're hoping to give you a little extra perspective. And I hope at the end you go, well, I didn't get all that. That makes some sense. I still love Gone with the Wind. And now I have this context on top of it. And it's okay. And those things, they can live side by side.
Well, and I also feel like if we don't have these kinds of preservationist spaces, you sort of can't make those conversations. If you just cancel it, like I mentioned Starship Troopers before, we know how wildly dystopian the future is, where it's like managed democracy is the term, which I didn't know until I started playing Helldivers 2, and I was like, oh, that's a thing. Like that idea of that super patriotic democracy that is clearly not a free state at all, but I need that movie to be able to laugh at the idea of something that would be horrific for us, and it makes it okay to engage with without feeling like I have to vote a certain way or avow a certain thing. I think that's part of why I kind of struggled with the pushback to the movie Barbie and people being like, oh, I can't believe that this is a movie that's against men. I was like, if you come out of that movie defending patriarchy, I think there's a deeper conversation we need to have. But if they never made the movie, we couldn't have it. And I feel like part of...
I just remember Ben Shapiro was like, he said they used the term patriarchy 10 times in the movie and never once is it ironic. And I was like, dude, Ryan Gosling used it as a verb.
Right.
It was ironic every time.
Right.
It was thoughtful. I mean, it was thoughtful every time, and many times it was ironic. I don't know what movie you saw.
And I also came away from it. I did an episode of the podcast where I talk about what I believe the real villain of the Barbie movie was, and it was not patriarchy. It was something else. But I think and that was what really struck me with it brought tears to my eyes, because when I got it, I was like, oh my God, I see myself in Barbie. I understand this very differently now. And I feel like that's kind of, for me anyway, I don't know if other people who watch TCM like me are like, oh my God, I just love TCM. I wish I could just like be a host and like have the spirit of Robert Osborne all about me. But I feel like it kind of gives me a way to talk about things that are really hard to talk about, to embody things that are really hard to embody without saying, let's have a conversation about the evils of a totalitarian government. Let's just watch Starship Troopers. Or let's have a conversation about the problems with the media and the television industry and how we grind people up. Let's just watch Network, right? Let's just get kind of lost in Patty Chayefsky's screenplay for a minute and then have that conversation. It's almost like TCM makes some of these conversations potentially a hell of a lot easier to have, because you don't have to start with either one of us. We can start with some outside thing that embodies the conversation and then have the conversation from a place that's not quite so personal and so raw. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's amazing how we sort of, I don't know that I think it's fair to say that when we signed on the air in 1994, we didn't anticipate, this moment, this conversation would happen 30 years later between a host who you're going to regret hiring and Joshua Johnson.
I don't know that they would regret. No, be nice. Be nice to yourself, Ben Mankiewicz.
No, it took a little bit, but they came around. I'm talking about the audience. The audience took a little bit to come around to me, but because I wasn't Robert. And that's in many ways that's understandable. That we're in this position now, right? We're in a where we don't need to talk about sort of the corporatization, the consumerism of the media now, and that we don't need to have this highbrow conversation and hand wringing conversation about it. Or at least we do need to have it. But I mean, we can start by just watching Network, as you say, and the fact that you can include that you can watch Network on TCM and get a little context about the film, right? About what was happening in the early to mid 1970s that planted a seed in Patty Chayefsky's mind that he saw the future, right? That he was 40 years early, right? 30 years early. So same thing with Facing the Crowd in 1957 and Bud Schulberg's script in the Elia Kazan movie that with Andy Griffith. So both these media films that just saw a future that you can't. It's amazing to me how this again. I don't think I ever use the word prescient except when talking about Network and a Facing the Crowd. And that we have a role to play in that. At TCM, again, it gets to this point of, I can't believe I have a job in this, television is stupid. There's a lot of great stuff, but it's pretty dumb. And, I started as a journalist there that's when I was in Miami, and I was in Charleston, South Carolina before that. And I thought I'd be a television journalist my whole life, but I grew to hate it. I couldn't wait to get out. And the notion that I would land a job in television as a host. I mean, sometimes when people introduce me at events or functions that I'm at, and even if I, have sent word or tried to get them not to, and it's always okay. I'm grateful to be included in anything. But when they say, television personality, Ben Mankiewicz, I'm always like, like there's nothing.
It's that painful.
Oh my God.
I bad?
I'm like, people who are described as television personalities are morons. That's bad.
I mean, where's the lie? You're not right. Okay. Proceed.
So I always say, they always say, like on my bio, it's like 2.5 minutes long, and I'm always like, just say TCM host. I'm good. TCM host Ben Mankiewicz. It's enough. So the fact that I have a job in this big picture broadcasting, that in what I love to do, that's what I see myself ultimately as a broadcaster. That I have this job for a place that matters. Like I got a job in television that matters to people, and that might, God, it feels crazy. That feels like I'm patting myself on the back, but it's really patting TCM on the back at a place that matters. Right. I can't believe it. I can't believe it, because there's just so few of these jobs, and that we have a role to play in the conversations that you're talking about, and that a role to play in many ways, teaching people about American history, world history, Hollywood history.
Yeah.
Even in these little 2-minute segments, we put these movies into their historical and Hollywood contexts. I was a history major, so I love it. I just find it incredibly exciting on a routine basis.
I know I got to let you go soon. I did want to ask you a few other quick questions. One, in terms of the next 30 years of TCM, there was a lot of hue and cry out of Hollywood when David Zaslav acquired Warner Brothers as part of the merger between Warner Media and Discovery. There were cutbacks, and there Hollywood directors, Steven Spielberg and Scorsese and others, Paul Thomas Anderson, went to David Zaslav and were like, freeze. And there was a big push to kind of save TCM and rally around this channel. How do things look at TCM now? Does it look like the channel is healthy for the future?
Yes, I think it looks like the channel is healthy for the future. We lost some really good people, but I think that we're in a better place than we've ever been. Some of that had to do with that hue and cry. It was nice. I got to say, man, that hue and cry didn't come out of, David Zaslav in a very short period of time became sort of the face of first of all, nobody likes studio executives in general, right? It's a generally fairly unpopular group of people, easily made fun of. And he became the face of that very, very quickly, which is a testament to his skilled stewardship of his company. I mean, he's been there a long time because he delivers on what he says he's going to deliver on. And he's incredibly smart. And I got news for you, Joshua. He loves TCM. I mean, I know it because I got texts from him before any of this happened, when he was just watching again and again, where he just thought something was cool that happened on the air. I don't want to suggest that we're like close friends or anything. We're not. And then when they have a way of running this company, the way of running their company, which has worked. And it's the way almost every big company in this media company gets run, right? And they want to streamline and save money where they can. They had like $50 billion plus in debt, right? You got to pare that down. You just have to, right? That's capitalism, and that's it's another conversation, right? But so when that hue and cry came, and those three directors leading a much larger group, but Paul Thomas Anderson, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, went to him in peace. Like they all work with him. They they're friends with him, and they were like, David, TCM's different, and we need you to recognize that it's different. And he did. And I don't know, man. To me, I'm cynical. So at nature about big business things, because ultimately, it's all about the money, right? So. And he listened to these guys and listened to all these film lovers who made it clear, and all these journalists who made it clear how important TCM was, and that we can't quite get run like every other network. We are definitely subjected to the same market forces as other television channels, but we need to be run a little bit differently because we are the only people who are the guardians of this great cultural heritage, right? And other people preserve films, but we're the only people who play a role in that preservation and then exhibit them on television, uncut, commercial free, as they were meant to be seen. So they need to treat that a little bit differently. And David and his team saw it and recognized it and stepped up. And it didn't fully change course, but they changed course. They and that, I don't know, that to me, that is literal leadership. So I had no problem saying that. Yeah, I mean, I would work for that guy forever. I think we are in great position going forward, and maybe in some strange way better off than we would have been.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I've had this argument with people who love film, and I want to be able to say Ben Mankiewicz agrees with me. So I'm going to see if you agree with me. Years ago, I had a conversation with someone at a workplace, a young intern, new hire, whatever, and we were talking about classic movies, and they were like, oh, well, I've never seen a classic movie. What should I watch? And some of the other folks around were like, Criterion Collection, Fellini, Kurosawa, and I was like, freeze. That is not where you start if you've never seen a black and white movie. And they were like, but Joshua, these movies are very important, and this is a very smart young man, and we don't want to dumb film down for him. He's a very bright. I was like, The first 5 ones you should see are, in my opinion, Casablanca. If you've never seen a black and white movie, start with Casablanca. It's the classic's classic. Then see, and it's also bite-sized. It's not the length of Gone with the Wind. Then see Singin' in the Rain, because it's fun. Then see Citizen Kane. Then, because you've already got a Humphrey Bogart in there, otherwise I'd say Maltese Falcon, get a different noir film, see Sunset Boulevard. And then, to mix it up, put a thriller in there and see Psycho. Start with those 5, and then reevaluate and go in any direction you want. And of course, they got Humphrey.
Then you can see and you can see Seven Samurai. You can see Rashomon, right? Then you can see Bicycle Thieves.
And they were like, oh, but classic film is such amazing. It's just aesthetic. It's a tradition, and we have to preserve, and the intellectuals. Like, movies are also entertainment. Like, entertain the kid. So I just want to be able to say that Ben Mankiewicz agrees with me.
So I don't sort of agree with you. I 100% agree with you. And while my 5 films might be slightly different, they also might not be. Like, that is a top 5 that I would be like, yeah, okay, great, sold. And you get the Citizen Kane poster behind me, which you'll see because you can't find it. I'm sure you can't. There's no zooming in this day and age. But my wife, God bless her, right above Citizen Kane there, wrote in Sharpie, screenplay by Herman Mankiewicz, because it's not on the poster. It's my grandfather. So that's a very valuable one. It's only one of a kind. So yeah, but even if you take, I don't need one of my family's movies in there. You could take Citizen Kane out. You could put in another Billy Wilder film. You could put Ace in the Hole. You could put, by the way, I would say in many ways, I'd put Face in the Crowd in there. That's a great media movie that has every bit the impact of network. So you're exactly right. Those are great picks. And they're arguably 5 of the 20 best movies ever made.
That makes me, you have no idea. You have no idea how many people who love TCM, who love you, who love classic movies, who are going to just give me, that's just the fact that you agreed with me, that's worth at least 15 points. And I am
I will tell you that all 5 TCM hosts would have said, of course, everybody's 5 would be, and it's not really a top 5. It's a 5 that you should see, right? That will have an impact on you. And while they may have given different ones, there's not a Dave Karger, Alicia Malone, Jacqueline Stewart, Eddie Muller. I'm just imagining Eddie. Eddie would be like, yeah, okay. Yeah. What do you want me to say? Yeah.
That's the list.
Great.
That's
Great.
it.
Yeah.
That's it. Before I let you go, I do want to, since you brought up kind of the meaning that TCM has for people. And clearly it does, because if you're going to buy tickets to a film festival or go on a cruise, like, you must really love this community of people. I feel like we're in a moment culturally where we're really deep into our communities, whether it's, and I don't mean political factions, I mean like sports teams or fandoms or, our other avocational communities, because the world just feels like a lot right now. And because we're sort of bracing for 2025, whatever happens politically. And classic film feels like very much a port in the storm in that. You talked about people wanting to just feel okay in that. And I wonder just where you see that going in terms of the role of film, of art, of entertainment to get us through whatever's coming. TCM's not going anywhere. We don't know where the hell the world's going to go. And I have some optimism in terms of the capacity, in terms of the tools being there for us to get one another through whatever's going to happen. I just don't know that enough other people, A, believe that, or B, realize they kind of have the tools to get through it, particularly through art, particularly through things like film. But I know you said you're more of a cynical person. Maybe I'm the wrong person to ask you this, but I wonder before I let you go how you see it.
I'm cynical about how we get out of the cycle that we're in as a country, right? I can't quite see it. It doesn't mean I don't think we will. I just can't see it. And I spend a fair amount of time thinking about it. I mean, once we entered into a world where there was just this open acknowledgement that disinformation, that intentional disinformation works, like, how do you snap out of that? I think you just get better at disinformation, right? So, and that's just a small little thing. So, I mean, it's a big thing, but a small aside. It's a huge, maybe the most important thing that we have to deal with. I think that, that said, we get back to some of what we talked about in the beginning. It sounds like a cliche because it is a cliche. But as my father used to tell me, there's a lot of truth in cliches. Before you dismiss them all, think about what's really in there, right? So we do have much more in common than what tears us apart. Sometimes what tears us apart is so big that it's unrecoverable. But again, we have the same, most of us have the same hopes and desires, needs, wants, and fears. And there, again, you mentioned sports, right? I mean, I'm a moderately compulsive gambler and a huge sports fan. And, I do not think that only people who agree with me about politics share that. Right. So there are so many things that can bring us together, and the movies, this is great art form that this country has been the most influential and powerful producer of throughout its 100+ year history. The art form, not the country, can play a big role in that, right? And I mean, I'm going to learn at the festival coming up in the middle of April, one for the 15th time. What these movies do for people, how they comfort people. How they help people through some of the most difficult times in their lives, whether it's their own illness or the illness of a parent, or God forbid, a child, or a friend. That watching those movies, I got stopped in a laundromat 10 days ago by a woman who waited for me to come back out, and who just said, I lost my mom 4 months ago, but I went back home and I spent most of the last 14 months of her life as she was sick with her every day. And we just watched TCM every day. We'd watch a movie, 2 movies, 3 movies, 4 movies, she'd talk about when she saw them, what it meant to her. Some of the movies I remember seeing with her, some of them were new to me. And she goes, I just wouldn't trade those 14 months for everything. I miss her every day, but I wouldn't change it for anything. And they're thanking me for that. I didn't have anything to do with that. But I'm here and I represent that place, and it takes, I'm getting choked up just thinking about it. It's a powerful place to be. And if we take some more deep breaths, and again, this all sounds so trite and cliche, but if we take a couple more deep breaths before we condemn everybody who doesn't agree with us, or call them names, or pigeonhole them as fools or morons, a word I used earlier in this conversation, Joshua, then we we might slowly be able to pull ourselves back to an era where we just disagree, as opposed to condemn everyone who is not on our side.
That doesn't sound trite or cliched at all. That actually feels very hopeful.
Well, I mean, I am hopeful. I don't know how optimistic I am. Certainly not in the immediate future, but the road is long. And to quote Bruce Springsteen, the road is long and seeming without end. So that actually serves our purpose in this conversation.
Ben Mankiewicz, primetime host at TCM. The network is celebrating its 30th anniversary all month. I cannot tell you how grateful I am to have had time to talk to you about all these things and to be proven right. I won't say that's the best part of our conversation, but I will count it as a highlight. Thank you so very much for making time for me. I really appreciate it.
I very much enjoyed it. Anytime. This was unexpected and a treat. Thank you.